Good evening. No president should have to do what this president did today when he spoke up in defense of the right to vote and the obligation elected officials have to graciously leave office when the voters say it's time to go. After nearly 2.5 centuries as a functioning democracy, that should obviously be a given. Sadly, it's not. Which is what made President Biden's speech today in Philadelphia so significant, the fact it was even necessary. And sadly, it is. Whatever else you might think of his specific legislative agenda on voting rights, the filibuster, or even who you'd prefer to see in office. After 4 years that tested nearly every pillar of American electoral politics, and after month and month of lies that have corroded public faith in elections themselves, it's become clear that the institutions and traditions of democracy are in need of defending. Traditions, for one, such as not concocting a convoluted conspiracy theory to explain away the simple fact of losing an election.
The big lie is just that, a big lie. The 2020 election, it's not hyperbole, suggests the most examined and the fullest expression of the will of the people in the history of this nation. This should be celebrated.
Now, if that weren't clear enough, the president said this, followed by a warning about the wave of state voter restriction laws based on that big lie.
In America, if you lose, you accept the results. You follow the Constitution. You try again. You don't call facts fake and then try to bring down the American experiment just because you're unhappy. That's not statesmanship. That's not statesmanship. That's selfishness. So hear me clearly. There's an unfolding assault taking place in America today, an attempt to suppress and subvert the right to vote and fair and free elections, an assault on democracy, an assault on liberty, an assault on who we are as Americans.
He called restrictive state voting laws enacted this year or in the works in places like Texas, quote, 21st century Jim Crow. He renewed his push for the two big pieces of voting rights legislation now stalled in Congress. Most of all, though, he kept returning to the larger theme.
The assault on free and fair elections is just such a threat, literally. I've said it before. We're facing the most significant test of our democracy since the Civil War. That's not hyperbole. Since the Civil War. The Confederates, back then, never breached the Capitol, as insurrectionists did on January the 6th. I'm not saying this to alarm you. I'm saying this because you should be alarmed.
We're also learning new details about what the former president was doing on the day the Capitol was attacked. They're contained in our next guest's new book, Landslide, The Final Days of the Trump Presidency, the latest from Michael Wolff. The following passage takes place with the Capitol under siege. Quoting from the book, the president, though, was digging in his heels. He remained singularly focused on the electoral challenge and had blinders on to everything else. At least that was how everybody was rationalizing something close to his total failure, willful or not, to understand what was going on. At the same time, no one in the White House was seeing this as the full-on assault on the Capitol and the nail in the coffin of the Trump administration that the world would shortly understand it to be. They were, for perhaps another 90 minutes or so, still seeing this as an optics issue, as Ivanka was putting it. It wasn't until later in the 3 o'clock hour that Trump seemed to begin the transition from seeing the mob as people protesting the election, defending him so he would defend them, to seeing them as not our people. Therefore, he bore no responsibility for them. Again, the book is Landslide, The Final Days of the Trump Presidency. Michael Wolff joins us now. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, thank you.
You spoke to the former president twice for this book on the record. I understand. You cover it's before the election, it's election night, and through the insurrection, and even really up until now. Talk about what was going on in the White House while what we were seeing on our TVs on January 6th was playing out.
Well, one of the important things to remember is that there was nobody in the White House. So From November 3rd on to Election Day, November 3rd to January 6th, one of the themes was that everyone that surrounded the president in the West Wing, in the campaign, even his family, were running for the exits. So you had by November 3rd, by Saturday, November 7th, everyone around the president. And let me state that. Everyone, 100% of the people around the president knew he had lost the election and nothing that he could do would change that.
Despite what the president himself was saying, all the people around him knew.
So it's, all of them, they knew he was, he had taken a step. I mean, they've always known he was a little, not like you and me, but he had taken a step further. So he was not in the present reality. Everybody knew this, and everybody was trying to create enormous distance between themselves and the president, and this includes his family. So by the time you got to January 6th, there was literally the White House, it was crickets, nobody there.
That morning, his kids had come in order to attend the rally.
Exactly.
And you write in the book that they sort of arrived with, while celebrating this, crazy 4-year experience.
Yeah, no. I mean, this was valedictory to them. This was, let's celebrate. We've had this incredible thing has happened to us. There was none on their part. There was no grievance. There was no, we're going to take this back. We deserve this.
Despite what Don Jr. was saying at the rally on that day.
Totally. They were just, you have to go through this thing. You have to say what the president expects you to say. But at the same time, you live in the real world. It's only the president with Rudy Giuliani who is not living in the real world.
You also write that it seemed like the president had contempt for, in some ways, the protesters who had come to support him on January 6th.
Yeah, well, he's always looked at these people and saying, they have tattoos, they have piercings, they dress in these costumes. Donald Trump is a man who wears a suit. So he sees them as, these are fans. They're like,
so
rock and roll acts.
About...
They see the fans, and, fans are great because they do what fans do, and they jump up and down, and they're emotional in a way that lends legitimacy to the act itself. But Donald Trump is not going to have lunch with these people.
Which is, it makes it all the more obviously hypocritical, but also just kind of sad that all these people have traveled to Washington, D.C. to, support the president and believe that the president sees them and feels them and loves them. And you're saying he's...
Well, I think it's more complicated than that. Just think of the president as a performer. It is wrong to think of the president as a politician. Wrong to think of the president as the president.
You think you think we don't see the former president through the right lens?
Absolutely. We have tried to fit him into this thing. As much as we've disliked him, as much as we oppose him, we still see him as a politician trying to accomplish specific goals. He is not doing that. Or his entire goal is to court the attention of his fan base, which he has successfully done, and he does. This is one of the big mysteries, the ongoing mysteries, is how has he so consummately channeled this incredibly large group of Americans. And he's done it outside of politics. The language he's speaking is not the language of politics.
You write about the outdoor rally speech on January 6th. He talked about walking to the Capitol with protesters, which in the book you say was something that he ad-libbed, that it wasn't a planned remark. You write, he added that part, the walk. After this, we're going to walk down and I'll be there with you. The walk wasn't in the text. The entourage heard little else. The hundreds upon hundreds of hours of Trump rallies that they had all been subjected to blurred into the usual blah, blah. But they heard that line, the walk. He did not mean this, of course. Trump didn't walk anywhere. The we was figurative. That was just something he said on the fly, which was obviously incredibly consequential.
Very, very much so, and very much. I mean, that was that old thing about not taking him literally, which he in fact comes off the stage and his chief of staff said, "Hey, we can't do this. There's no security for this." And he goes, "What? What are you talking about?" And he said, "Walking." And he said, "Oh, well, I didn't mean that literally." And for everyone around him, it was really the big tip off was a walk. Really, Trump walks nowhere. Again, whenever he speaks, he's always throwing out these things. What gets the response? Again, it's all playing to the audience.
Also, I mean, Vice President, as we know, was in a secure location, the Capitol, and I mean, did he even care that Pence was there? Do you know?
Well, he was. Yes,
he
was actually. That's sort of the main background to January 6th. Is he's totally focused on Mike Pence.
He cared in the sense that he wanted Pence to overturn the election, not Pence's safety.
No. I mean, he wasn't even thinking. I mean, he was still right up until the end thinking Pence was gonna throw out the electoral votes and install him as the president.
Because that's what Giuliani was telling him even on that day.
Totally. And they had gone through session after session after session with Mike Pence saying, "I am not going to do that." Even that morning, he calls Pence and finds Pence in the middle of the session of Pence and his people writing the statement that will come out during the president's speech saying publicly, "We're not going to do this." But at that moment, he is still saying, "You've got to do this. I know you're going to do this. Do this." And he's saying it in this really mean way and, insulting Pence's manhood and patriotism and yet still believing this will happen.
Rudy Giuliani, I mean, he's portraying the book. I mean, you said he's basically drunk all the time.
Drunk all the time. Yes, absolutely.
It's incredible that the President of the United States is, if that's the case, that he's relying on this guy who he is now, by your reporting, completely cut himself off from.
Yeah, and the president actually sort of knows this as much as the president is in some outer space himself. He knows Giuliani is drunk. He knows Giuliani has
the president
all
doesn't
kinds
like drinking.
All kinds of sort of focus problems. He knows Rudy is a mess, but that doesn't make any difference because the key thing is who will say what the president wants to hear. He's always shopping for that. And at the end of the day, in this situation when no one would say what the president wanted to hear, except Rudy.
Are you surprised that the former president spoke to you? I mean, he obviously, didn't he threaten to sue you after your first book? I mean, your first book had incredible details in it. They denied, saying that they had talked to you.
He tried to stop the publication of my book. The only time in the history of the Republic that a president of the United States has tried to stop a book from being published.
Were you surprised that he agreed to speak, or is it in character that he wants to try to control the narrative?
Well, I'll tell you how this. So I mean, I had been speaking to people around the president, and one of them reported to him that I was doing this book, and what the president said was, "Oh, that guy gets ratings. Let's see him." So again, there's no content here. It's just about the audience.
He knew that people would read it, people would pay attention to what you were saying.
Absolutely. And he has this belief. It's like with Mike Pence. Mike Pence tells him he's not going to do it, he's not going to do it. But the president is still coming back and saying, "You're going to do it, you're going to do it." He believes in the power of his own voice, the singular power.
He also must know that people around him speak and are speaking to you and speaking to other reporters, so he wants to get in on that.
Absolutely.
I mean, he knows that people are not loyal around him in terms of silence around him.
Yeah, and it's almost it's really difficult to understand because in addition to that, when I spoke to many people and they say, "Oh, well, and I said, I've spoken to the president, and they said, "Well, okay, maybe I'll speak. Let me check with the president." And then the president would say, "Oh yeah, talk to him." And then they would say these horrible things about the president.
Right.
So this is a disconnect at so many levels.
Some of your sourcing has come under criticism in the past. There was an excerpt of your new book, which appeared in the Times of London earlier this month. Liz Harrington, who's a new spokesperson for Donald Trump, tweeted, quote, "All these stories from the Michael Wolff book are not true. Wolff never asked President Trump about them. If he had, he would have refuted them. Fake news."
Well, actually, curiously, in this book, knowing that I would have to go through this because this is what the Trump always said, I supplied a list of virtually hundreds of the details in this book, just listed them, sent this to the president's office, and they sent back. They were very diligent. They went accurate, and in some cases they added new details. In some cases they disputed them, and then I was very careful. Do I have two sources on this? Now, this spokeswoman, who is a new spokeswoman, she doesn't, is just literally the president, who will say anything. That is to say, the election was stolen. Speaking of the big lie, he will give the little lie to this poor woman, who then has to go out and say this stuff.
I wanted to talk to you more about the former president's current life with Mar-a-Lago and more. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have more with Michael Wolff. He describes the president and his wife in Mar-a-Lago as being looked at, quote, somewhat like zoo animals, or perhaps like a, quote, newly married couple. Later, President Biden's thoughts on those Texas Democratic lawmakers who fled the state to block voting legislation they do not have the votes to defeat. Beto O'Rourke joins us for that. We'll be right back. We're talking tonight with Michael Wolff about his new book, Landslide, The Final Days of the Trump Presidency, just out. One especially vivid passage focuses on the defeated president's anger at the Supreme Court's rejection of his election challenges, specifically directed at Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Michael writes, "There were so many others I could have appointed," this is the president saying, "there were so many others I could have appointed, and everyone wanted me to. Where would he be without me?" Meaning Kavanaugh. "I saved his life. He wouldn't even be in a law firm. Who would have had him? Nobody. Totally disgraced. Only I saved him." Back with Michael Wolff. First of all, that he's calling the guy he nominated to be on the Supreme Court totally disgraced. It's fascinating.
Well, it's just that he lives in a quid pro quo world. Right. And he put him on not only did he put him on the court, which would have been enough. If I put you on the court, you should be loyal to me.
You're my guy. Just like Sessions was supposed to be his attorney general.
Exactly. But here's a guy who he felt he rescued because he got into trouble. He saved him. Right. And so double, he couldn't believe that at the end of the day, the Justice Kavanaugh didn't say you won the election.
You write about his life down in Mar-a-Lago, and I want to read that out. You said, Trump has his dinner here most evenings. He appears just as the patio has filled, at which point everyone stands and applauds. Often when Melania is here, they eat alone at a roped-off table in the center, looked at somewhat like zoo animals. No, that's not right. They are like a newly married couple. Every night is a wedding at which they spend their dinner greeting friends and well-wishers. I was also fascinated. You say that Trump conducts most of his business in the lobby so he will be seen.
There's a whole set of odd things. The oddest thing is that he lives in the middle of a country club. He's sort of the only resident of a country club, and it's sort of this old-fashioned kind of country club with poster boards saying, prime ribs night or Italian night with accordion player, or my favorite Asian night. And then in the middle of this, so you go into Mar-a-Lago and there's this big room with sort of hunting lodge and Renaissance palazzo. There's kind of a lot of design themes in violent conflict here. And Trump sits in the middle, and he's at these series of couches, and this is where all day long Republicans from across the country come to kiss the ring. Now, if you're a Mar-a-Lago member, you can see this, you can sit in, you can hear this.
It's fascinating.
It's all on show.
That's really.
The weirdest thing in the whole world.
Yeah.
I was sort of brought in there, and he's sitting with, I think, the senator from Kansas, his name I can't remember. And I'm at another couch, but I can hear everything. And at one point, one of his young aides is looking over at me, and then he gets up and he comes over and he says, you know, I remember when you sat on the couch in the West Wing for fire, and I can't believe we're going to do this again.
Really?
And then he takes me out to have a drink in the bar.
Do you think he'll, I mean, based on your conversation, do you think he'll run again? Or do you think will he just talk about it and hang it over everyone's heads and then make a dramatic decision one way or another?
Yeah, I think it is the thing. You cannot predict what Trump is going to do because there is no plan. There is no strategy. It just will happen in the moment. Is it possible that at some big rally, he thinks he's going to get a big response by saying he's going to run for president again, and that's the decision? Yeah, quite perfectly possible.
Michael Wolff, the book is Landslide. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.